Hello, this is Joseph and Train, and welcome to a new episode of Home of Sound. Home of Sound is the virtual and global home for any music lover to connect, learn, and engage with the electronic music community. We started the platform with this very podcast series to discover and share insights into the life, work, and tools of producers, DJs, VJs, promoters, label owners, playlist curators, and other creators. Since the global pandemic hit, we launched a series of online masterclasses with creators such as Ansom, Scarameria, Francois X, Swarm Intelligence, Freddie K, Face Fatal, Vijay Martinovna, Malika Maria, Lag, BSK, Romek, Manny D, Arjun Bagale, and many, many more. If you're interested in the masterclasses, you can access any of them, also in bundles, on demand at www.homeofsound.co.uk. To say hi, connect with us, suggest new guests, leave feedback, and see what else we're up to, you can find us on Instagram at home_of_sound. And for all the other links, visit linktr.ee/home_of_sound. And now, let's start with today's guest. Enjoy.
Stefan, welcome and very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Joseph. My pleasure. Thanks.
Let's start. Yeah, it's our pleasure. I think we came across your work and your music for a series of coincidences. I personally came across you because of Macro. Eventually, we chatted because we collaborated on something, and then I was impressed by the stuff that you did because you have a huge range of things in your portfolio work.
Hope so.
Yeah, and
for someone who stuff for a long time, you gotta keep it interesting. So you
need to do more.
Shift the range. I think it's really hard to like one thing for 20 years.
Yes, indeed. And so for someone who hasn't met you before, like, and if someone meets you at a house party and asks you, "Hey, who are you? What do you do in life?"
Yes, that's really hard to put into one line. And as I struggle to find like the one line description with, I mean, like, okay, I do music. I'm a musician. Like, okay, which instrument do you play? Well, it's not an instrument. Well, maybe it is, but so it's really hard to put it down. But I pretty much do the whole range of what you can do with music. Like, I produce stuff, I mix stuff, I record stuff, I do a label, I run a publishing company, I curate music festivals, I DJ, I play live, I work with other musicians, other artists. I do music for art, for film, for fashion, for so pretty much anything you can imagine doing with music, except for I don't sing and I don't play an instrument. But I also have a release where I do play an instrument, which I usually don't, which is a guitar-based release. But I'm not a guitarist, so
you experiment.
Just time to. There's a very good friend of mine, a very dear friend from London, Philip. He does the Tapeworm label, and it's an experimental label. And I did a loop-based guitar record where I just would record sounds on the guitar and then create loops, which I layer. And with a tape, you can, if you have auto reverse on your deck, so you can listen to like this huge loop, which is subdivided into small loops. So I just took the occasion to abuse a guitar, which I can't really play, and just create little loops out of it. And you can, press on reverse sides on the tape deck, and you can create your own loops. So it's like a looping record.
That's one of the beauties of in general electronic music, not having a standard canon. Like you can experiment as much as possible. Like there's no rule in a way.
You can do whatever you like. I mean, some people don't, or they just put limits to themselves, which is totally legitimate, because if you have no limits, you're lost. So I know a lot of people who try, to produce music, but then they check like, okay, 500 plugins and 500 synthesizers, and they never get to anything. So that's the other extreme. And the minimalist extreme is where you just say like, okay, I only work at 130 BPM for kick drum, hi-hat in between, and so on. So you can limit it very narrowly, or you can be lost. So if you just find a point in the middle, that's usually where it's most fun.
Yeah, the balance is also like tricky, because with electronic music in general, you can sit on your own at home one computer, you can do unlimited. You have unlimited option. You can go in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Talk about like your path, your life, and like how you came across music and your passion. Like, do you think there was anything in your life that particularly inspired you or brought you closer to music when you started?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with music since my parents were musicians. My father was a composer and conductor, so
Wow.
I think my parents took me to rehearsals, like orchestra rehearsals, when I was a baby. And so I would disrupt the rehearsal because I heard some sound, it's like a guy with a trombone, and they made a sound, and I would imitate the sound, so they had to take me out. And so that was always there. But I think what actually got me into wanting to make music myself was rather my friends since childhood. So most of the time, my friends were a little bit older than I am. It's like 1 or 2 years, But when you're 8 years old, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So they would discover music and then kind of indoctrinate me into listening to that. So when I was 8 years old, I was a big Iron Maiden fan, and then they discovered like Led Zeppelin. So I really liked Led Zeppelin, and then they moved on to jazz. So I would follow like this little kid following his bigger friends, and
explore.
yeah. So eventually, when I was 16, I was trying to be a jazz snob and play bass guitar, and I did that for a while. And then again, I met people who were trying to do electronic music with instruments. At that time, a good friend of mine was Mike Daliot, who later on became one of the maybe most influential programmers with native instruments. He did software like the Massive synthesizer.
Yeah,
huge. So he was a drummer back then, and we were trying to play together. He was much better than I was as a musician. But like he influenced me a lot, and he was trying to do electronic music with acoustic instruments or with electric instruments. So I ended up buying an effects unit for my bass guitar, and then I tried to tweak my bass sounds to sound like drum and bass or jungle bass lines. And so that's where like my first experience of actually trying to craft electronic sounds came from. I didn't even have a synthesizer back then.
Super interesting. So it sounds like you got exposed initially to non-electronic music, like acoustic music of different genres,
right?
And somehow you brought it into the electronic music realm. That is,
I mean, I started listening to electronic music maybe like around properly, like 1995, 96. I was into like jungle drum and bass. And I really liked that. I began buying records, and I also quickly discovered just a few techno and house things, like Jeff Mills, DJ Sneak, stuff like that. And I just bought the records. I didn't have the ambition to do that, but then I tried to do drum and bass, and I got like 2 or 3 pieces of gear at some point related to my bass guitar first, and I bought a sampler. I didn't have a synthesizer, and with a sampler, it was easier to make house music than techno. So I began doing house tracks. I liked the idea of techno, but I had no clue how to do anything with the gear I had. And so I, for fun, basically tried to do some house tracks, and I ended up producing house and releasing house music. So that was kind of an accident.
Well, it's very interesting. And like, what year was that? Because I know that you started producing music or at least releasing music around 2001. And I know you have a long history of releasing.
I think I bought the sampler in 1999. And I pretty quickly had some tracks which were were okay. And some of them got released. So I had no idea of labels or anything. And back then, I somehow met Dixon.
Yes.
Back then, he was like, now he's like a superstar DJ, but back then he was a resident at the local club where I used to go. And I just showed him my stuff. I brought him like a little DAT cassette, So every time, I had to show something to someone, I had to buy one of those cassettes, which cost something like, I don't know, like 10 euros or so at the time. And it was kind of expensive to show your music to someone professionally.
Yeah.
So I gave him a tape, and he kind of liked it. And he gave me a list of addresses for 5 labels to send demos to. And one of those,
Like physical address at that time.
yeah, he just, you had to send it physically at that time, like year 2000. And he gave me like the mailing addresses for snail mail for one label in the US and one in Sweden and one in Berlin. And so one of those labels was Classic, and I sent a demo, and those were
Wow.
the stuff that got released. Like my first releases were maybe like the 3rd or 4th house track I ever did in my life.
That's great. I mean, like it's a great thing. Like especially like, do you think it's luck? I mean, you must have been good. Like
No, I mean, it depends, because
doubt.
that music, to some degree, it's not supposed to be made by professional musicians in the traditional sense. You don't have to be with an arranger's degree. The idea is that pretty much any kid who spends enough time tweaking the gear can find something interesting.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of years of practice as a musician. I mean, I was trying to play jazz, so I had some, also like music theory training, where just trying to figure out how to play jazz standards and complicated changes and scale chord relations. And I was learning to read music really quickly because I wanted to become a studio musician. So I had some, some background, but not enough to lock me into like a traditional mindset.
Right.
And then like half a year on the sampler, you kind of figure out stuff. And some of the tracks were apparently good enough for the time. It's not like I created a genre or something back then, but
that's
good enough to be released. And some of those things, like people enjoy playing still.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some interesting things about sometimes the naivety of just starting off with when you don't have a reference. In a way, you don't have necessarily a benchmark of how your music should sound, and you're just experimenting.
Or you do have a benchmark, but you usually, when you're just starting, you're not capable of hitting the benchmark. So you try to sound like something, but it doesn't work, but it maybe takes you elsewhere. So I basically, like my first tracks, I tried to sound like Masters at Work, or there was this label Spec Records with Jesper Dallebeck and people like that, the Persuaded. I tried to sound like those guys. And, there's like this one track, and okay, I'll do a Masters at Work track, and it didn't sound like Masters at Work at all. But it was, like kind of my track. Like this was like the best I could do within what I could do and with the gear I had. And other people said like, okay, that's good enough to be released. They didn't think it sounds like what I tried to do, but still something.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's almost like you bumped into your own style or your music voice, almost by chance, by tweaking and playing and exploring without having like a direction.
This is the essence of electronic dance music, is that you don't. I mean, if people achieved what they wanted to do, we wouldn't have techno and house today.
Yeah,
those
for sure.
People, who started producing techno and house, they didn't want to sound like techno and house. They wanted to sound like a big commercial, successful disco production, with a 20-piece string section. But they only had this drum machine and this synthesizer for some chords or a bass line, and they just tweaked it around and eventually came up with something which other people liked, and then like, oh, I mean, maybe there's something to it, so we follow that road. It's just it's just in the structure of the gear. If you switch on a 909, you have techno there. You don't have to imagine it. It's just in the machine. Anybody who would have switched on the 909 in 1986 and didn't have like 10 other pieces of gear, and like that's your drum sound, and you will have techno. There's no other way you could deal with that.
It's super interesting because I recall having read that especially with the 909, there was a machine created for hip hop or R&B, and then eventually it didn't hit the market there because it was too powerful to become like a hip hop.
They tried to sell it to musicians who would play in hotel bars. Just imagine like a guy sitting at a piano playing ballads in a hotel bar, And their idea was many, such jobs, they don't have the money to pay for a whole band, what would be a piano trio, like one guy playing piano, one guy playing the double bass, and one guy playing drums. So they built the 303 to emulate an acoustic bass, and the 909 to imitate like a jazz drum kit. And imagine somebody in a hotel bar switching those on and trying to play back to that. It's absurd. It's so that those things they ended up in thrift stores. People who bought them with the hope to do something loungy sold them off. They couldn't use them, and then somebody picked it up for $60 in a thrift store in Chicago. So that's how history.
It's so interesting to imagine like, even like from the producer point of view, like I would love to at some point meet or know what went into their head, what they realized, like, fuck, we not willingly we created a genre. Like we in a way we let people create a genre by fucking up our market fit in a way. Like they didn't know that would turn into acid or techno. Like they would basically create 30 years worth of music. Super interesting. And so going back to your path with labels, so you release on Inner Vision, Perlon, Ovum, Classic, Cocoon as well. And was when you look back at your early production, how do you feel about those? Like, do you feel like, oh fuck, this is like too old for me, I would never do this now, or you feel like proud of what happened?
Yeah, I feel okay about it. No, it's I mean, there are a couple, of course, like everybody has some tracks that, if you listen back after some time, it's not that great. But basically, whenever I didn't try too hard to meet expectations of what I think is required of myself. I'm kind of happy with what I did. I have a couple of records where I thought, like maybe the label expects me to do this or that. Whenever I try to do that, the stuff is not, I'm not really fond of it. But as long as I just, on my own devices, trying to do something which was interesting to myself, I'm still happy with it. I can listen to pretty much everything, and I reissued a lot of my early stuff. I had it remastered a couple of years ago. And even actually like 2 weeks ago, I found an old track of mine, which I'd totally forgotten that I ever did, like maybe like the third track I ever did. And I listened to it, and it sounded okay to me. So I just remastered it and edited it a bit. There were like a couple of sections where I had like some congas in it, which I didn't like anymore. So I cut out the congas and put the rest together. And it's being released on a compilation for a label here in Berlin in a couple of weeks. Yeah, like there's this place, Paloma Bar, and they're doing compilations with different people who are connected to the place. And I gave them this whole track because it's one place where I still play house music. So I gave them like a 22-year-old house track. So like even stuff which didn't make it to release 20 years ago, I feel okay to release now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Is the track already released or public?
No, it's coming up, but it will be out in a couple of weeks.
We will share it. We'll put in the show notes as well, so people can check it out. And it's so interesting because also like what I've seen also is that the music that has been produced like 20 years ago sometimes still sound very current. And of course, there's a bit of music trends or taste is a bit cyclical in my view. So there is a countback now, for example, of trends. There is blending into techno.
Yeah.
But still, like sometimes there are tracks that I remember from a label called Audio Assault, like very, very fast techno, and you would play them now and they sound like as if they were made yesterday.
Yeah, that's the thing that people, like every now and then you have a new generation of kids who are just like 18, 20 and who can get into clubs, and to them like stuff that was 20 years ago just doesn't exist. It's brand new. So
yeah,
it's if you're 40, it's a different story because like you can say like, well, I heard this 20 years ago, but that doesn't apply to people who are 20. So them it's it's just like we're going to have a party, and if we like the sound, who cares
Why not?
if it's been around before? No. And if you're a producer and you try to do what you like, and what you like happens to resemble something of 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, like, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Why not? It's a very good point. Also, it's very subjective how fresh something can taste or sound like, because if you never heard it before, it is fresh by definition.
The thing is that often people identify just one element in something and say like, well, I know this, so it's not fresh. It's like the typical old people thing. It's like, when I was 16, we had this already. But things never repeat themselves perfectly. Even if you try to produce something that sounds like 1986, like entirely in every detail, you'll fail. You won't be able to, you won't be able to recreate it exactly. There will be like something little that's different, and we don't hear analytically most of the time. When you listen to music, you don't listen to like, oh, that's really interesting what's happening at 1.2 kilohertz. What you hear is like the whole thing, like how it all comes together, the holistic appeal of the sound. So just one little thing here and one little thing there, which is different, shifts the whole perception of it. It might recall something which is like retro or copying something, but it will end up differently. And so there's always potential for it to be perceived as fresh by people.
Yes, and it's so interesting because
just because memory is tainted because we connect things. We don't see every detail. We just have like an outline, and we recall something like, this looks like this and this sounds like that. But like other people have like different associations, so to them it might be totally different. So.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that you just made me think about is that like your perception of music as a person would always be subjected to your past experiences. So when you go to a club and you're listening to something for the first time, you would still try to relate it with something you heard before. It might sound similar, it might sound completely different, and that will skew the perception of like how you perceive the entire genre.
Absolutely.
Because that creates prejudice or like judgment. Do you think like it's interesting what you said about like old people, that the cliche thing that they say, oh, the music in my time sounded much better. Do you think that is somehow survivorship bias, because they relate to tracks that have been stood the test of time, or is because really tracks before were better?
There are two things to it, right? I mean, like, one is survivorship bias is that you forget about all the terrible stuff and you only remember the great moments. So this remembering of the great moments is also, there are like specific points in your life where you make some experience which really impresses you, which is like really big in your personal history. And that's usually when you're a young person. Like, very few people have like profound life-changing insights when they're 50.
Yeah.
They usually have those when they're 12, 16, 20, maybe 25. So it's also, what I recognize when I talk to people and you discuss like anything, like politics, perceptions, whatever. People just don't change their opinions once they're past 30. You can bring out like the best arguments, and I'll be like, yeah, okay, but like the next day I'll be like, well, I know actually it's like that. So past some age, you just refine what you already know. So I think it's really, really hard to change profoundly after some certain age. So all the shocking stuff that really sets you on a course for your life, I think it's happening quite early. And that's why people at a certain age think, stuff was better 20 years ago, just because it made like a strong impression on them then. But that's because of kind of their own biological or psychological state rather than about the actual thing. And I think it's extremely condescending saying, like, you 16-year-old people now, you don't know what good music is. That's a terrible view. It's just like ignoring that you were that same 16-year-old person at some point.
Yeah. Exactly, because I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And also, one thing that I was thinking about is that when we are young, especially when we are young, when we are like 12, 13, 15, that is usually coincides when we start listening to music, opening up making our own choices. It's also when our hormonal reaction to things is the highest in our lifetime. So we probably like if something sticks or really hits us at that point, it would stay for a long time and it would be hard to match it later in life.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, very interesting thing about thinking about music perception in this way. Yeah. And Stefan, like one thing that's, I mean, you run a label, Macro Records Recordings, and which you started in 2007 with Finn Johansen, right? Am I right? Yes. Which has become a great platform for your music, but you also released people, artists like King, Electro Guzzi, that we both know, Poof, Maria Chavez. Like, when you think about your journey with the label, now it's been a while that you run it. Like, what do you think is key in like keeping consistency of what is your vision, but also supporting artists and letting them be free in creating their own music?
Mm. You know, to some degree, if you want it to remain fun, it's important not to be like too rigid or to take it too seriously. So there's many labels I think get caught up in this, like tunnel vision, what like the label should be or what the approach and the sound would be. And we always thought, we don't have a formula. So whatever feels good is maybe best to do, instead of trying to define it once and then cling to that concept for a decade. So maybe what we kind of try to avoid is doing too much stuff that others already do well. Sometimes there are records or tracks which we find very good to play out as DJs, but they have a home. They're like labels that do that sound, and we don't have to do that. Like often you have artists who want to release on 20 labels, and you get a demo and it's actually a good track, but then you see like, okay, those artists already released on 7 other labels, and there's no reason why this should be on this label and not again on the other label where the previous record came out, which is in the same style or something. So what we basically try to do is find people who do something in a very unique way, in like their own way, and if it's something which we haven't heard before, we're getting very interested. So we have some bands who have like a very specific way of doing stuff, and we just don't know other bands who do it the same way. And then we have individual artists who do things that often are not even in the realm of releases, such as Maria Chavez, for instance. She didn't have much released audio, but she's been an artist for a long while, working with records and breaking them and treating them and making stuff on the basis of that material. And we found it like very interesting to work with such an artist, because we couldn't like point our finger somewhere and say like, well, there's that label that has 20 of those people doing that. So that's something very interesting when you have an individual who has like a very unique approach to stuff. And I think that's maybe to some degree something that unites or unifies the artists releasing for Macro. And then like basically once you settle on such an artist and you identify their work is interesting, I think it's quite important to give them some degree of freedom to just unfold their vision. It's sometimes hard in practice because sometimes we feel it's good to say like, well, maybe this is not something for us. We also not, like there's some labels who are very exclusive. Like, so if an artist releases somewhere else, they don't want to work with that artist anymore. So that's not the issue here. So everybody who works with Macro can also release elsewhere. But just to begin with, it's important that those artists are not already at home at another label. That's usually a good start.
Right.
And then to have something to present to the world where we feel it's kind of unique, It doesn't have to be like super important. We don't seek to sign the biggest hits of the decade or something. If it happens, well, but if it's just interesting on its own terms, it doesn't have to be commercially viable immediately. There's no pressure to sell.
Yeah.
but it should be something that has the potential to be a blueprint for others to follow. So it should be stuff that can be developed, that can be imitated, that's like conceptually focused.
The idea. Yeah. How much of your thinking goes in the release plan? Like so for example, let me try to be specific. Do you have some sort of release schedule that you then try to fill with your music, with artists, or it is as it comes? So whenever an artist does something,
it's pretty much as it comes. Some artists have requirements because they have to plan tours, particularly the band.
Right.
It's a bit more complicated with them, so they're very specific. So it comes from the bands. They say, we have, a tour coming up in like 9 months from now, and it would be great to have the record at that point in time. So that's a requirement of touring. Other than that, like on our side, we don't try to have several releases coming out at the same time. So it's good to have like a couple of weeks in between, but we don't release that much anyway. So that's usually not a problem. And all those, like 10 years ago, it was really important, like at which month you release. I always felt, there like specific month where it's like very important to have a single out then, because like that style of music, it gets played in Ibiza or something, and that's the season. Or it's it's something that wouldn't work in Ibiza, then you would want to release in September, and people can play it from then on. And something like August was a really bad month for releases, but that's not true anymore. Or January. Nobody, like 10 years ago, nobody would put out releases in January. And sometimes we think, if you still do like physical vinyl, sometimes it's amazing to be like the first record in the first week of January because nobody else releases. So like all the vinyl stores order your record just because there's nothing else to order. So even so if you hit a week when there are like 200 new records, some record stores might say like, this is not that interesting for us, so we will pass that record and order another one, and then you feel it in the figures of like how many pieces of vinyl roll out through the distribution channels. But generally speaking, it doesn't matter anymore because most stuff people just try to discover artists on their own. They go to channels like Bandcamp, and then it doesn't matter what time of the year it is at all.
Yeah, and it is interesting because also the pandemic has fucked up entirely the rules, if there were any before.
Yeah.
And it scrambled the eggs.
It really doesn't matter, the only thing that really matters is your content.
Yeah.
If something, if you get the feeling, and like back in time, that was like I think the feeling which most labels had. This needs to be out right now because it will be dated like 2 months from now. There was a time, where certain styles would be developing, and you're somewhere in that wave. And if you miss out a couple of weeks, it makes a change. This is very extreme back in the day in drum and bass, which was a genre which was moving very quickly, and stuff had to be released at specific points in time. But there was also, this whole maybe. How would you call it? Like post-minimal house techno around 2005 to 2010. There was also this feeling of stuff has to happen at a certain point in time. So at that point in time, I was like very concerned about like when does my music come out, because I knew I was kind of in a competition with like a friendly competition with other producers, like who brings out certain records. And then people would notice, I had instances where other people changed the name of their record because they'd chosen the same name as my record, but my record came out like 2 weeks earlier. So they withdrew and changed the name and the artwork just because of that. Like nowadays, nobody would care. So, because so much stuff is coming out. So if your record, the Cat EP, and the next person has the same, like nobody would bother to change artworks or something. But there was a point in time where it mattered. Nowadays, I think it's important that your content is unique. So in a sense that if people seek that sound, they have to come to your record. So sometimes we have releases that, they don't create a big splash when they're released, but like 5 years later, somebody is saying like, I want to have something that sounds like techno, but doesn't have a 4/4 feel, but it's like a 7/8, like some odd meter. And whoa, there's the record I did 5 years ago, and I signed a license for like a fashion company campaign, which were like seeking that specific sound, and it's just like 5 years after it was released. So that was like the biggest
spike in
spike in income related to that record, and it's like 5 years after it's released, and it happens to many people. Like there's like a lot of like secondary users, like film soundtracks, or sometimes some big name DJ will feature a track in a mix, and then you will see like sales and spikes for that specific release. Like sometimes like some huge DJ will play something in a set, and then it's like like this YouTube thing with a scenery and filmed with 10 cameras, and it has like 800,000 views on YouTube, and then the tracks in there, people will start to seek out those tracks. So it spikes on Spotify, it spikes on Bandcamp, it spikes on iTunes.
Everywhere,
people seek out the vinyl. So sometimes that stuff's out of print, like they play a 10-year-old record, and people will scramble to find the record, and then the label is out of copies. And so I think like when you release it now doesn't matter. It's just like make something unique that has a chance of ending up in some context where it gets attention, and that attention can come in like 2 months and 2 years and 10 years. But if you build a catalog of stuff that has potential for a lot of different contexts, that's maybe the better strategy than trying to micromanage current stuff, which is just like in front of you.
Which is also like much beyond anyone's control zone, right? Because it's impossible to have the perfect timing, and you're never gonna have all the ducks in a row for your record to explode. You might have them, but it's just too much for you. Yeah, exactly. And one interesting thing is that like when I did research on on your work, like there were a lot of people that were referring to Macro as an avant-gardist label. Do you agree with that definition? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've used the term for lack of better terms describing what I do. I mean, it sounds a bit grandiose because avant-garde suggests that you go somewhere where like all the rest will follow. So that would be a bit too much. But I'm basically trying to say, pick up the crumbs which the innovators of techno and electronic music left on the ground, because so much has been done. Like there's, even when I began producing music, there was already, like such a back catalog of stuff that came before me. And, when I first found techno, my feeling was like, I can add nothing. It's already perfect.
In what sense? Like in terms of like the, so when you find like a techno track, like
I found techno tracks where I thought like, oh, this is perfection, by other people. So there's absolutely nothing I can add. And to some degree, it's it's true. I mean, I think I tried and did some stuff within 4/4 techno, which I think doesn't exist in that form. But it's just it's a niche product. It's something that doesn't define the whole genre like like early techno tracks did or early house tracks did. And I think every now and then something comes along that shifts music. But I think in the last 20 years, that wasn't that much production, but rather tools that change. So, people began using certain gear or certain software, and that changed the sound. Or there's, a company rolling out some software synthesizer, and it has like those very distinctive presets. So lots of people buy it, and then like all the music begins to sound like the software. But in that form, the software programmers are much more influential than the artist. There's certain artists who manage to capture the sound of that because they get an early start. They begin using something, and then they release tracks, and the tracks are successful. So people associate that sound with the artists. But when you open the software and you go through the presets, like, oh, that's the sound. Like, so
Yeah.
I mean, that's always been the case, but I think there's something specific about techno as well as house that, except for the 909 machine and the 303, that's like a ready-made. Like acid house was bound to happen. If you have the 303 and 909, you have acid house. There's like no other way to look at that. But
Yeah.
just the next step in development, which I would put with the works of Jeff Mills and Robert Hood and Underground Resistance at the time, but like mostly when Jeff Mills and Robert Hood went solo after Underground Resistance, they spent so much time tweaking specific gear that they removed themselves from the presets, from what the machine was doing. Not with the 909. That sound, I think they still have that sound, but which is mainly FM synthesis. So they have this like cheap Yamaha, I think the DX100 was the instrument. So FM synthesis is like a very complex thing, and it's very unpredictable in a way. So if you like tweak parameters, it just goes all over the place.
You just
yeah. So it's it's like one of the harder things to learn as a programming musician. But they spent years tweaking that and eventually came up with stuff, which is very individual, and it kind of shaped the way people treat other synthesizers who are not FM based. They treat them like what those guys did in the early days of like Access recordings and Plant. So that's like a level of achievement which we don't see that much anymore, because you don't have those isolated situations where you have like basically just 5 people trying to figure out how like one specific thing works, and they hack away at it. Now you have like 50,000 people sitting at a thing, so you get like this extremely diverse range of variations of one sound, and you can't put your finger and say like that's the person that invented it. With like techno, it's pretty much like the whole history of techno, like every single person, like for the first 5 years of it, is like known by name and what they did exactly. So you can't, it's not that much of like a mass movement. It's just like 10 to 15 people in Detroit and the stuff they listen to, which is also on record, because they said like what inspired them and the gear and everything. So there's like a complete historical record. But if you look like anything that came up in the last 10 to 15 years, it's much more complicated, and it's much more based on what some company put forward, and then you have like all those people trying to use it, and it's much harder to make an impression on that base. So wrapping it back up to like my own stuff, what I did is I'd never brought like an instrument to that degree where I shape the sound where like, okay, like here's this new style of music. What I rather was trying to do is to look at what interests me and to find stuff in between where I think like, okay, like if we conceptualize that and make it rigid in a way like, like the 909 gives you rigidity because it can only do those things. You can make this artificially in a way. For instance, I could say, okay, I'm going to do techno, but I'm not going to use 4/4 as a meter. I'm going to use 7/8, 11/8, or 9/16 or something. So I just use odd measures, and then with that artificial limitation, try to see where I can take it. Of course, people have done records with those irregular meters, but I don't think they've done it in such a concentrated form. So I can say like if you want to listen to techno in specific odd meters, I did it, so it's there. But that's just something that's interesting to myself and hopefully to some other people. But maybe it's not life-changing for the music community. But what I've been trying to do is like come up with a lot of stuff like that, where just set some narrow limits and see, just like go through that conceptual gateway and then try to see where it takes me and maybe others. So
and it's very interesting what you say, because in a way it's like to me it sounds like you trying to understand the rules of a specific genre, like the canon, like the benchmark, and then playing by breaking those rules, so that the listener as a reference point, they might come across your music because they like the first iteration or the main genre, and then they find out what you're special, what you're about as an artist. And when you were talking about like this thing, the tools influence the production or the creativity, like what came to mind was massive actually, because for me, one of the biggest, in a way, the new genre, if we can call it like that, the new dubstep, in a way, for me, I always think about Skrillex as the person who brought dubstep to the mainstream. Dubstep had existed before for a number of years, but it was very niche. It was almost like a sub-genre of drum and bass. And then someone came out and said, I'm going to just make it like go crazy. And I think he was one of the first people or artists that became known for that specific sound that created he had repercussions on other genres as well.
Yeah,
So like
the particular case of Skrillex and that, like US dubstep that got big. There's also a piece of technology behind it, which is the massive synthesizer with native instruments and the presets in there.
Exactly.
And it was designed, I think the idea was to do like some next level drum and bass sounds. But people like Skrillex use it in a different framework with like a different tempo, different rhythmic organization, and came up with that. But like a lot of the sound is like a specific software appearing in a specific point of time, and some people jumped at it, and the rest is history.
And created something. Yeah, exactly. And it's massive. I think it has been one of the most influential tools of the last 10 years, probably.
Yeah.
Really created shoot things up. Let me pivot to another set of questions I want to ask you, because you know that just before the pandemic, around February last year, so 2020, you started and you curated the Storm Festival in Berlin at the Philharmonie. And I found that super interesting because you essentially brought, like, I see you as a person who was, especially now that we're speaking, as a person who came from an acoustic inspiration, brought that to electronic music, and now you're bringing the electronic music from the club to a non-club venue, so a concert hall in this case. What was exciting about the experience? Do you want to tell me more about how that happened? Like, what excited you about that?
Well, the Philharmonie, the building of the Philharmonie in Berlin, it's quite interesting space. If you look at it from the outside, it has this rugged architecture, and it's one of the most interesting acoustic environments to listen to music, in my personal experience. You can sit in there, and it's a very unique experience. And electronic music has its own spaces, like a club, basically like the black box. You have like this room, and you have a sound system with ideally 4 points or 2 points at the front of music hitting you from all sides. But acoustically speaking, it's not the most refined setting.
Yeah.
Whereas the Philharmonie is a concert hall which is designed specifically for listening only. It's not a multi-purpose space. It's not something where people gather to listen to some conference going on. Or it's really built for music listening only, but it's built for acoustic music listening. So if you try to play hard techno in there, it doesn't really work because too much bass builds up. So it's very specific. And I always found that producing techno or electronic music that kind of derives from techno historically, like IDM or whatever. So like there's a lot of experimental music that's still kind of related to techno. There is no specific listening space for that in a city like Berlin. There's just clubs, and then there are like some places which were built for all sorts of other music, but not for that music. So strange enough, there have been very few efforts to bring electronic music, which is very strong in this city, into one of the concert halls, which Berlin has a couple of those, and I think the Philharmonie is the finest setting for that purpose.
Is one of the.
So I think it was a unique opportunity to
Sorry,
get.
Stefan, it's breaking up a little bit. I don't know if.
Oh, yeah, I hear you. It's short, like a little bit disrupted.
It's breaking up a little bit. Yes, same for me. Let me just check. My internet connection seems to be okay, but
mine too. Well,
does it work better now?
Let's try. So the idea was that there are some artists where I thought it would be interesting to them to have the chance to tailor their music to such a listening environment. When you're trying to, it's sometimes a bit awkward to do experimental stuff in a club or in some place where you have a band playing. So you have like this person standing on a stage where you usually expect to have a drum kit and guitarists headbanging in front. So to actually give people the opportunity to work with such a fine space, that was very intriguing to me. And at the beginning, the organization of the Philharmonie, the people behind it, they wanted to bring electronic music into this space, but we're very open about the concept, so that was great. That sometimes people try to force you to do fusion in such a place where they say like, well, we'd like bring something electronic, but we also want to have those people playing the violins and the cello and so on. So they didn't.
I want you to put a key on.
So instead of doing that, for a first edition of the festival, I'm quite happy that we had electronic music only. It was really just bringing individual artists who do, I believe, very interesting things to that location and let them explore what they can do with electronic sound in that space.
Yeah.
And there were two stages. So one was there's a huge entry hall to the
foyer,
and you could actually play dance music in there. So acoustically that works. And then there is the space where usually the orchestras plays, which is really for listening. So people would sit down and listen for a 1 hour performance in this setting. And so things would switch between those two. So you could get stuff that actually has a beat and has an intriguing concept, and maybe you don't hear that music in a club in Berlin every weekend. That's the other thing, that you don't need to just bring a techno party into the Philharmonie in the city, because there are enough clubs in the city that do that all the time. So there is also like a challenge to find something that's maybe danceable but not connected to Berlin nightlife all that much.
Yeah.
So that maybe explains a bit like which artists played there and why.
Who was the audience that you? So I have two follow-up questions, because this sounds super interesting, and I'm sorry because I think we're having a bit of connection issues. I don't know if I'm glitching, but sometimes the connection seems to be.
You're fine. I hope I'm not too disrupted.
I'm gonna also ask Ale. Okay, connection in Berlin seems still to be like a big issue. I don't know what happens. It's pretty hard. And I have two follow-up questions. One is, did you decide the concept? Did you create it entirely, or they gave you some input, some boundaries when you created the Strong Festival?
No, it was entirely open to begin with, but I tried to bring in the team of the Philharmonie and discuss with them, to make sure this is something which they're happy with. So I didn't try to impose, like, here's this alien stuff landing in your. It's a building with quite a history, and it hosts one of the world's most renowned orchestras. So you try to be respectful with that history and with that context, but at the same time
to build around that,
to have no bad compromises just in order to respect some tradition. But luckily, that was not a requirement at all. They were entirely open. I could, like pretty much suggest anything. I would show them stuff. I'd make sure, that they know what they will be hosting, and they were like very interested and very very open and really like up for getting into like exploring what I had to offer, and sometimes giving feedback and saying like that's interesting because of this, and it reminds us of that. But there is no guidance in in the sense of we want to achieve this and that. So there's a very unique opportunity, to get here the keys to the building basically, and then you have 2 days. And,
that's amazing. Sounds
but it's
fantastic.
pretty much, it's also harsh because you have to start from scratch. It's an acoustic performance space, so there's no sound system. So we had to plan what kind of sound system do we bring in here, like how do you put it up, because it's a circular space, so you have the stage in the middle and you have the audience sitting all around. So usually with music that comes with speakers, you can't do that easily. If you want to project a stereo image into a circle, that's kind of hard. So, but I think we found some solution, and there's a lot of artists who do very interesting things that also have a visual element. So like most of the performance also had like a huge screen, so we couldn't utilize the whole circle. Maybe for the next edition we will be able to do so. So we will have to do away with the screen. But for this time, most things were audiovisual.
It's great that it worked out. I mean, it's always like you never know how well received, how technically it would sound if it's the first time that the venue. It's almost like it's a makeshift venue in a way.
Yeah. I mean, they had some bands there, so they had amplified music, or they they have regularly jazz stuff and but they never had electronic dance music.
That's pretty cool. You have that in your in your portfolio. You were the first one bringing pure electronic music in that. And the other question that came to mind was that, what about the audience? Was it like an entirely new audience to electronic music, or it was like 50-50 club people or non-club people, or it was, I don't know, anything in between?
It's very mixed, but I have one anecdote. An elderly lady called the ticket office a couple of weeks before the festival, and she's someone who's well known there because she's been going there forever, like for decades. She's been a regular, going to the orchestra concerts, so they know her by name. And she called and she asked, well, I'd like to know, will it be very loud? And they said, yes, I think it will be very loud. And she said, okay, then I'd like to have 2 tickets. So to make sure it's going to be loud. And
wow.
So people who would never get into a club got the chance to see this. I think this is something I didn't think about initially, but because it's it's a government funded institution, they sell tickets to everyone. There's nobody at the door judging you, saying, well, you can't come in tonight.
Yeah.
Which many people have how do you say, they're not comfortable going to a club because of fear of rejection.
In Berlin, yes. Yeah.
Anywhere, I mean, like in many places, when you have a club, it's kind of, you have somebody standing at the door and sending people away. Some people don't feel like queuing for an hour and then being told you're not, that's for you. So I think that's something that maybe allowed a lot of people to experience this kind of music, which otherwise wouldn't have a chance, or wouldn't it wouldn't be for them to go at 2 a.m. and queue outside of some club to maybe really get in. I mean, it's maybe a bit of an overstatement, because in Berlin, even in the most selective clubs, you see all sorts of people. Like at Berghain, you see sometimes people past 70.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I found it amazing.
And some of them are regulars, so it's possible. But also, like some neighbors of mine who have kids who came there with their like 80-year-old kids. You can't get an 80-year-old kid into a club in Berlin. So there is maybe if you run a festival in a location like this, it enables a lot of people to experience something which otherwise
Right.
is they're locked out of it. So that is something very interesting to me.
Yeah, I find it super interesting. It's almost like, especially when it's a public or public funded institution, where the purpose of the place essentially is to provide art fruition for everyone, for the population of the city.
Yeah.
Beautiful to bring something that usually, as you said, is restricted to a narrow, dark club, late
Right.
night institution.
The
You
thing
bring
is,
it to like a
orchestral concerts, like even with the Berlin Philharmonic, they're heavily subsidized, which means the tickets are affordable. If you go to a concert in New York, where it's not publicly subsidized, the tickets are much more expensive than here. And but still, there's like a specific section of the population that goes to such concerts. It's not neutral in terms of social class or educational levels or so on. So on the other hand, a festival like Strom Festival brought in people who otherwise wouldn't go to that building. So some of them go in, they see this architecture and they go like, oh my God, this is amazing. So they might go back for something which otherwise it would have never occurred to them to go and, like get a ticket for the Berlin Philharmonic playing as the orchestra playing there. So it brought a lot of people into context which otherwise they wouldn't experience.
Yeah, on both sides.
Yeah,
because it essentially, as I said, like it works for people who generally could just go to clubs. Yeah, super interesting. I'm congrats on that, and I hope there's gonna be a new edition when
we're
restrictions
planning.
allow.
Like right now, it's hard to judge when it will be possible again, which basically at this point depends on how vaccinations proceed. In Germany, which is kind of a slow process right now. But yeah, who knows? But
who knows?
I hope like next year we will be able to dance again, not just be in the Philharmonic.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the park. Anywhere there is space. Stefan, as we're going toward the wrap up now, we're hitting the hour. I'm going to ask any listeners who have questions for you to type your questions on Facebook, on any of the pages where you're seeing this video. So we're gonna select them and try to ask you to answer them. But one question that I had was, so now 1 year later from the first edition of Strom Festival, it's let's say March 2021. I know you did an exhibition, or let's say you scored a photographic exhibition for Team Routed, and so which is very interesting because in a way you're applying your music also to totally different contexts where there's no live audience at least. For people who are musicians who have been, of course, impacted by the pandemic, they can't perform outside. How can they rethink about their current and future work, considering that maybe performing into a live gig it's not possible for the next 6 months or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, over the last 20 years, most musicians have shifted their attention towards how can I get as many live gigs as possible, and many have neglected recording or releasing recordings in order to optimize playing live, or recordings have just been to promote live gigs. Whereas 20 years ago, there were people who were only producing or never playing anywhere. So shifts in industry kind of destroyed that career path for many people. It was just like economically not feasible to only produce, and you had to play live. And but the problem is we see now is if you just create another dependence, on another context, you say like, okay, I can't depend on released output, but I'll, 100% on promoting playing live, and I'll center my whole career on that. you can find yourself in a situation just as the current one. So it's sometimes hard to assign your priorities in a way that you diversify your exposure in a way that, you know, you have like many different avenues for your work. That's something
Right.
important to think about. So, you know, it's one thing to you know, have DJ mixes which people can check and then eventually book you to a club, but tracks which DJs can play. But to me personally, and I guess like to most people who produce music, eventually there are like many different aspects about the whole thing which we're in that are interesting and are worth amplifying, despite there being no immediate way to convert it to a live gig or into a sale of some recorded material. So, you know, just like putting stuff out that maybe has potential down the road and not immediately is very hard for people, because many people try to, you know, like get that next gig or get that track into other people's DJ sets or hit that many plays on Spotify this week. So, but if you plan for the long term, I think it's important to build a catalog of material that has more than one application. So which just dance music, you know, but which eventually has a chance to be used in other contexts, or which gets you out of just having to perform in a club. But, you know, it's very hard because like in the current situation, there are like very few avenues that are still open. You know, they're like, yeah, the one you mentioned, which is music for installation in a museum. You know, that's not a big market. There's like not, it's not like there are 5,000 museums that are trying to commission music today. That's not the case. But it's one thing I've never planned. You know, I've never planned to do music for a museum, but over the years I've done like many different things, and one thing leads to the other. So, you know, the more different things you have, the more exposure you get. And like, I think many people think you have to be very concentrated and you have to have like a very narrow profile of doing this or that in order to cut through, you know, because there's like so much stuff going on, and to be noticed you have to basically produce the same track 50 times in 3 years, right? So, you know, like you release it the first time, nobody notices, and then you basically do a track that's similar and until somebody knows, but it's like all the same track. I think like many people follow that because it feels right, you know, like you get a bit more attention when you keep doing stuff. But if you do different things, you know, it feels scary to people because they feel, you know, like you do a bit there and it doesn't cut through, and you do a bit there and it doesn't cut through, and you don't follow up, so it's worthless. But if you build enough of it, like something catches on somewhere, you know, people see value in it in different ways. And so I think it's very important to consider how you can make your music individual enough for people to care about it. So that can be in some narrow sense, but you can probably, you know, if your stuff is that narrow that it has only one purpose, it's too narrow. So if you can, if you can make it
diversify.
see, like not, you know, don't try to do everything. You know, there are also people who just try to be everything to all people. That never works. But as long as, you know, it feels honest and is interesting to yourself, and you don't do it with you know, like the ultimate commercial purpose, you just do it because it feels interesting to you, and you try to see how far you can bend it, and that's how you get your range. I think that's valid, and that gives you a lot of options to survive when like one avenue closes, like playing club gigs right now.
Yeah, and it's super important. And I think, I mean, there's few guys few artists that come to mind when you mention this. I mean, Albanoto is probably like an honorable example of an artist that has managed in a very good way to create his own, I would say his own unique voice that is applicable to the very club danceable setup, but also to something that is completely different, like an installation. Performance.
Yeah, that's a very good example, because he does, you know, stuff in the arts world, which is audio installation. He does music with ensembles. He does film scoring. So, you know, he has like these like 20 different outlets, and you know, if he can't perform for 1 year, that's not a problem, because there's like so much other stuff to be done.
going on.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that is like they still, like, when you hear his music, like, it still quite sounds like Albanoto most of the time. So, like, it's him, Castel Nicolai. It's the voice is still there. Like, it's almost like he made an instrument out of the way he makes music. That's interesting. And Jeff Mills is another example where it was much more oriented toward the club setup, but also pliable.
He also has, like, such a diverse output. I recently checked, what he's been doing for the last couple of years, and it's, he did an album with Tony Allen, who's an African drummer who played with Fela Kuti, like legendary Nigerian drummer, and he did. He scores films, and he did projects where he had it mixed down at Abbey Road Studios, and I just feel, okay, I think he's just having fun, and he likes doing those things, and he's like, I want to have an album mixed at Abbey Road Studios, and he just books the session and has it mixed there. Just maybe like
why not?
When he was 18 or so. And it's just like basically this like teenager's wish list. I want to do this and that and that, and he's just doing it, and I think it's wonderful. What else did he do? He had this project with I think it's like 2 Japanese musicians. What was it called? I think it's called Spiral Deluxe. And he did this audiophile series where he recorded it in like the highest quality and had it processed and put it on like super heavy vinyl, and it's only released in like some absurdly high resolution as digital files. So like
very specific and interesting.
I think that's what you have to do in order to keep it interesting over time, because if you do this for 30 years and you just like try to do like the most fully techno track, which would work in every club, and you do this for 30 years, you'll get very bored. But
very bored.
You have to find some ways to just look a little bit left and right and just open up a little, just to keep it interesting
and to have fun, like with with your own music, and to enjoy it yourself. And there is a few questions that come through. So Simona, actually, it's not a question. Simona is saying, Strong was kind of a bridge between generations. I loved seeing people of all age dancing together. Amazing.
Hello, Simona.
Thanks, Simona. And there is a question from a person that we know well. I mean, certainly much better than I do. Mr. Style King. He's saying, I have 2 questions.
You mentioned him already before the interview.
I mentioned him already. Honorable mention to Style. I say to Stefan that the first time I met Style was a Village Underground 3 years ago after he performed, and we ended up having a whiskey breakfast at 7 in the morning. So it's pretty interesting. So
I haven't had a whiskey breakfast in
Style is asking, I have 2 questions. Maybe we should do it like when Style comes to Berlin.
Yeah,
I think we should organize that.
We'll get a bottle of whiskey.
7 a.m. whiskey session. Done. Style, if you're listening, we volunteered you for this crazy idea. And he's asking, I have 2 questions, Stefan. What kind of music technology excites you lately?
Right now, there's like 2 things I'm working on at the moment, which are kind of technology based. And one is I'm trying to build an album that consists entirely only of reverb effects. So I've had an obsession with reverb units like for a long time, and I have like over the years I've managed to get a bit of a collection. And at some point I figured, okay, like if you put in just like click into reverb and you go like 100% wet, so you only hear the reverb. So a click is basically like one hit over the whole spectrum. So it goes like from 20 to 20,000 hertz, and it just excites this reverb algorithm. So if you do this and then you just tweak the reverb, you can actually create all sorts of sounds with it. And with a lot of automation, you can basically do something like a very abstract way of exploring architecture that's not real, because those are artificial reverbs, they're electronic units that emulate the sound of space of like a specific concert hall or something. That's what like a reverb unit tries to achieve. But if you tweak the sounds, you change it, and that's the equivalent of moving through space and hearing where you are. So what I'm trying to do is like some mix of architecture, choreography, which is like moving through those spaces, and the technology, of exploring like what those reverbs do on their own when the only input you have is just like one hit on the system. And so it's just, it's something which is extremely interesting, because you can get them basically to emit harmonic sounds. Like actually, like, some space has those like standing waves and stuff where you have like specific tones that are the modes of the room. And you can do this with a reverb effect too. So you can also feed it back into itself and, like make it feedback. So it starts to build chords and stuff like this. And it sounds extremely interesting. And I really like artificial spaces. So that's something I've been spending a lot of time with. And the other one, so reverbs, I just love reverbs, and it's one of the, like most interesting fields of exploring technology to me currently. The other one is I'm trying to build kind of percussion rhythms that feel like a person's playing them, but it's like entirely artificial. So I use like some modules which generate like funny functions, and they just modulate each other and create some sort of a live feel, which is like very live but very artificial at the same time. So that's maybe like a separate album which is just built on rhythms that are oddly natural and unnatural at the same time, through basically having a lot of LFOs, like functions that just modulate different parts of a module that is like a physical modeling synthesizer. But so you can change, the shape of an instrument, and you can also modulate
like a flute.
Yeah, like some drum, like a drum skin, and you have it. Or you have like one thing modulating the tension of it, and one how hard it is hit. But that's like, it's just like an electronic model of, there's not like a person hitting a drum, but just like electronics trying to emulate how a drum would behave if a person hit it. But then you don't have a person, but you have like functions modulating these things. And if you just layer those functions, it gets very complex. And you can also do this with, like a sequencer, which is like the piece of gear that creates electronic time. So usually electronic dance music, you have a sequence telling you like, this is, the kick drum is exactly like the distance from one kick drum to the next is like, like this exactly. Where if you have a person playing it, there's a little bit of variation. It's like not
the swing,
the same millisecond, but when people play an instrument, it moves. The time's a little bit loose. But in electronics, it's like very, very strict. But you can also modulate this electronics equipment which generates this pulse, so you can make it, stretch and bend a little bit, so it feels a bit like a person doing it. But the way it does it is like how no person would ever do it. So I'm just trying to build tools that create an natural feel of sound and of time and of rhythm. So it's
naturalizing a piece of hardware.
It's not that much trying to get the latest technology or anything. It's just like taking something and maybe trying to find a way to make it behave in some strange way, which is maybe not the way it's supposed to be.
Natural in a way, a technological way.
But I'm also not like I'm. There's some people who are like really good at electronics and they're taking everything apart and modding it, and I'm not good at that. But most pieces of gear already give you so many options that you can just design your own artificial way of moving it towards something which maybe is not like the most standard way of using it. And if it's just complex enough, you can stay interested in it for months on end.
There is remember there was very old artist. I think he was doing something with the piano 40 or 50 years ago. I don't remember his name, but it reminds me of that, like basically preparing in a way, making an instrument play itself according to a sequence that is almost random, right? So you are naturalizing a piece of technology, making that sound more like a human.
There was a composer, Conlon Nancaro. He was American, but he moved to Mexico at some point in time, and he did music for a so-called player piano. So it's a piano with a roll of paper,
right?
And you punch the paper, and those are the notes. So it goes, and every time a hole comes up, the key of the piano goes down, and you hear that tone. So you can basically punch in notes, and then the piano would play that. And he did music for this, so he punched in things that like no person could play. Because you can't stretch your hands, so you can't be that quick. So he has like extremely interesting things with just like this roll of paper going through a mechanism that would force the piano to play. So like nowadays, you can do it with MIDI. So just go into your sequencer and you punch in the notes. It basically does the same thing. In sequencers, it's called the piano roll. It comes from that old roll of mechanical pianos. So
like the punch card was really
you could you just open your sequencer, like Ableton, Cubase, Logic, whatever you have, and you just put in notes, and you can do this, and you just pull up a piano, like a multi-sampled piano, and you can write those pieces. But like back then, like nobody else thought of creating music with that, so that was very interesting. And I'm trying to do this with like some modules to make them play themselves.
Yeah, very interesting. So this is a hardware, right? Your programming hardware in this case, because everything you mentioned, the reverb, I guess you're using also software, but especially with the other randomization you're applying, that is done through a sequencer that is hardware, right? So you're not using the computer in this case.
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm an old person. You can tell by that I have hardware, because that's when I began doing music, there was software, but it wasn't good, so I had to buy a hardware sampler. Like nowadays, like nobody would, unless you want that specific sound of this like historical sampler, you wouldn't, you would just open in Ableton like the sampler instrument plugin. So but because I still have pretty much everything I ever used, I never sold stuff I really used. So I have basically, if I want to put back my studio to the state of 20 years ago, I could do that, because I still have the same stuff.
The gear.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. So yeah, I think it's kind of a bit of lazy. I don't like to stare at computers for too long. So I don't use that much software. I mean, I use Ableton and some plugins, but for instance, like all the synthesis I do with hardware.
Yeah, at least, I mean, to record it, I mean, it's pretty useful when you want to arrange what you have created, or if you want to refine it.
Yeah, that's like my favorite thing now, just, like recording like a 10-minute session with some sound on a synthesizer. And then, I have this bank of stuff on my hard drive where it's just like some sound being explored for 10 minutes, and then I can layer them and build a track of those. And that's kind of, it's better than just having a sample or a loop, because you get more variation in 10 minutes. So you can tweak things on some hardware, and you can just edit out what doesn't sound good, and then you can layer a track with those and just build stuff, and it's kind of fun.
That's super interesting, and I think it ties, or actually not really, but it might tie to the next question from King. Actually, when will we hear Stefan Goldmann material related or influenced by drum and bass? As I know, I have a good relationship with this style.
Yeah, never. I mean, so when I began doing electronic music, I wanted to do drum and bass, but there were kind of limits to the gear I had. So, and also to the knowledge I had, of course. So I didn't have a synthesizer, so I tried to create drum and bass sounding bass lines with a bass guitar and some effects. And I got some interesting sounds, but it didn't sound like, like good drum and bass. I think like programming beats, I was kind of okay at, but I kind of lost interest at some point in the development of the genre. I think it had like this peak development between 1996 and 2000. And then, it just got maybe more effective or louder or harsher or, I don't know, punchier. But I don't feel there's like much development in it. I mean, there are like some very interesting experimental drum and bass artists, such as Felix K, for instance. Somebody
Felix K.
follow is like a guy from Berlin. Or there's stuff that's like loosely related to drum and bass, like there's this Japanese artist called Ena. But I don't think I can really contribute useful stuff to the genre as well. I mean, like, so it's not a priority, I'd rather sit and do something else. So I'm afraid I can't offer drum and bass, unless that bottle of whiskey, which we're going to share with King, entices us into a drum and bass session. But we'll see.
We'll see. I mean, if that does happen, I'm really curious to hear at some point. And there is one more question for you, Stefan. Any particular artists that you think are very interesting and would stand the test of time? Hard question.
Like recent artists?
I guess yes. Let's go with recent artists. Someone that particularly was.
There are a lot. I mean, and the thing is, there's so much you can discover. New artists where you see like, okay, that person has been releasing for 10 years. It's amazing stuff. And how have I missed this, for so long? So like recently I discovered this French artist who's called Amandra.
Amandra, yes.
Yeah. Amazing. And I just discovered his stuff and he's been releasing, for some time. And I was like, how did I miss this earlier? So that's like where it's also great, if you discover something, it's not just one track, but you have this whole catalog of stuff which you can explore at once. So Amandra was something that totally knocked me off my feet recently. And, I usually would say like stand the test of time when, people have a bit more of a history. So if like, I just like somebody's first track, I know I also change over time, so maybe in 5 years I won't be
of course.
that much in love with something I just heard. But there are like, of course, a lot of new artists, but some of them are well new because they've been around for 5 years rather than 20. But so I don't know. Like recently, there's a techno artist called Steph Mendesidis, whom I really love.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But he's been around for a while, but just like recently he's been releasing more. So I think he didn't have that many tracks like 5 years ago, but like now he released a couple of EPs and gorgeous stuff. Or there's this Danish artist, Søs Gunvar Ryberg, SOS.
Oh yeah.
I think is absolutely fantastic what she's doing. So I'm pretty sure people like that will be with us like for a long time. Like still, like developing and building new stuff. But like what I've heard already is like, oh, like that's really on a different level. And who else? Like a lot of people. Like there's this artist Dolt from Sweden, and they also have there's Dolt and Kuf, KUF, like the band we have.
Yeah.
With the same name. So they're different people, but I like them both. There's a ton of stuff. I don't know, like is Marco Schottel a new artist? No, that's an established artist.
Yeah. I think Marco Schottel, very interesting name as well. Like a very, very cool music set as well. Very diverse.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of people who've also been around for a while, but who've been doing fresh stuff over the last 2 years, for instance. But yeah, like this.
I'm sure there is the list.
That like
no, go ahead.
come back, for instance, one of the first artists whom I discovered in house and techno music was Jesper Darbeck, or the Persuader. And he's been around for, I don't know, like 20, 25 years or more. And a couple of years ago, he was doing this label Parabel from Sweden.
Like a number of years.
With Patrick Ziegler. So
No,
like such people sometimes, they come back with like fresh stuff after decades still. So that's also something I really love seeing, when people who I've been following for like my whole life in music still surprise me with like really good stuff. So that's also something I really appreciate. Or they're like,
and also like, artists like eventually they change, they mature, they create different music over time, and then it's almost like having what we were saying before, like it's a fresh music that is being created because it's like the same artist that was producing 20 years ago. Yeah, amazing. And Dalian on Facebook is saying very interesting and inspiring as always. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
And King said, very cool answer is we'll go for that bottle. For sure.
I thought so.
Now we have to. And
we
nice.
should
And
a bit.
What? Sorry, what did you say?
Like whiskey gets better when it gets older. So if you buy it now, it will age by the time.
I lost you for a second.
Anyway.
No, sorry, I lost you. I lost you again for a second. I don't know if it's my connection or it's your connection that is.
It was a stupid joke about whiskey aging.
Going off.
Next.
I missed it. I missed the joke. No.
Never mind.
And Stefan, let me ask you a couple of questions before we wrap up.
Yeah.
This has been an incredible chat, really inspiring. Who is a guest that you think we should really speak with, and why? That comes to mind.
Yeah, pretty much any name I mentioned until now. I'd love to. I'd love to hear Sös Gunveruberg or Markus Shuttle, or knowing more about Amanda, or I think I've never seen a video interview with Jesper Darbeck as well. Also, actually, I don't know. Do you know if Donato Dozzi does a lot of interviews? Because I can't recall having.
Probably not.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't like to. Yeah, but that's someone.
Probably not. He's another like.
Yeah.
Another genius, like musical genius of like very, very interesting music, unique sound, great live set.
It would be great to hear some thoughts and backgrounds, about what he's doing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I would love that too. Thank you for the suggestion. And then I'll ask you this last traditional question that we always ask. What question would you like us to ask our next guest without knowing who they're going to be?
Oh. Well, yeah, I don't have like this one punchy question for you. So like, okay, like ask this, and you go like, wow, I didn't think of that. Sometimes it's like the most standard stuff that gets people to reveal, the most interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, they have. So I just enjoy listening people talk about how they work and why they do something the way they do. So like, just like what keeps you going, like what makes you do music. It's like, it's not like an eye-opening question, but the answers can be
very interesting. Exactly. Yeah.
But you can also, like once you have King on the chat, you can also do the next talk with him, and then I'll suggest whiskey brands or something.
Oh yeah, I would love that. King, you, Riley, if you're listening, you have been nominated officially now.
So we can do this like this Facebook chain letter, nominate 10 people, and then
I'll send you a message. And as you might imagine, there is question from our previous guest, which is what non-musical interest you have been toying with or developing over the last couple of months?
Oh, well, other than discovering Amanda,
Whoa. Non-musical. Let's go with something that is outside of music.
oh, non-musical. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Non-musical.
Yeah, something else. Whatever
There
that
isn't that
is.
much because music has been the only refuge. I mean, I have a small daughter who's a year and a half, so that's that's my main interest right now. But other
That's the
than,
real boss.
but that's just like, okay, that's my own child, so that's just like my eye-opening thing for myself. But in the current situation, music is like the only refuge because I have the studio where I can go to. There are not that many other places to go to. I mean, you can go to the playground with the baby, but other than that, like the studio is kind of this temple where you just switch on things and you just have a dialogue with something that creates like strange patterns on a meter. So that's it's maybe lucky that you're not forced to develop non-musical interests when you can do music. And maybe that's true. Many people in the current situation. I know many artists who have neglected production because they've been too busy touring. So there are people that played like for a week, and now they have like 1 year to get used to doing stuff in the studio again. So they're like discovering everything anew, and so it's maybe it's a good time to develop musical interests rather than non-musical interests. I mean, I do a lot of reading, but it's not new. I've been doing this forever, so
for a long time.
Just basically, you get to do the same things that you enjoy, just without the traveling and the meeting friends and the partying. So those are like the things that are missing. But other than that, it's pretty much doing. I've been lucky to have the opportunity to do what I like, instead of trying to, like some people had to find totally new jobs to sustain themselves. So that's maybe a different situation.
Indeed, and it's a beautiful passion. It is normally pretty healthy, especially if you do it at home. And we're lucky that we love doing that. We are still allowed to at least make our own music. It's great. Yeah. Stefan, this has been a great chat. I loved meeting you, speaking with you, and learning more about your projects. Any latest projects or anything upcoming, or if not, like where can people find your work, your music, anything you want?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of virtual projects which is maybe like a sign of the time. So I've been working with a video artist from Argentina, Javier Benjamin. We've been doing things together for a couple of years, and we also worked together at the Philharmonie concert. And now we're doing something that is a commissioned work for a planetarium in Buenos Aires. So it's like one of those circular spaces where you project images of stars in the skies, and we're doing a music and projections thing for like this sphere. But because you can't visit the planetarium now, we'll put it on YouTube. So it turns out you can put 360 video on YouTube, so you can explore this. It's like a 10-minute work, music and visuals, and we're pretty close to finishing that and putting that up.
Super interesting.
For that, I think I'll wait a bit with releases. I don't think it makes sense to do dance music releases right now. It feels strange to release dance music when you can't dance to it. So I've been hoarding some tracks which I've been producing, but I'll be releasing them once there is something like an open club somewhere. And in the meantime, I'll keep exploring stuff that's not club related. So that's a good moment to do stuff. So, you know, if you're producing techno and you haven't done non-dance, like now is the moment to do stuff, to explore things.
It is exactly. It is. Yeah, there is more time, more space, and yeah, exactly, less pressure. So it is a great moment to make more music. Yes, Stefan, thank you so much. This has been great, and again, like I hope we will see each other in person at some point soon. Maybe with Strail, we're gonna do our whiskey morning. Yes, very cool. Thank you, man. Have a good evening. Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you. Good night.
Hello, this is Joseph again. If you made it this far into the podcast, we would love to hear your feedback, and you can leave any comments anonymously or with your name, and also suggest whom we should interview next via the link bit.ly/HOS_feedback. Basically, bit.ly HOS_feedback. If you're a creator or work in music, you can also check our website www.homeofsound.co.uk for on-demand masterclasses with creators such as Ansom, Scarameria, François X, Swarm Intelligence, Freddie K, Face Fatal, Vijay Martinovna, Malika Maria, Lag, PSK, Romek, Manny D, Arjun Bagale, and many, many more. And again, thank you for listening, engaging, and being with us home. Until next time.